Good morning, you're watching and listening to GB News, and this is The Political Correction. I'm Jenna Davison, and today I'm joined in the studio by the wonderful Paul Embry, and in Northern Ireland by the one and only Arlene Foster. We're here for the next 2 hours to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge. This is not about journalists talking to journalists, it's about you telling us what you think. Coming up this hour, we'll be joined by MP Lee Anderson to discuss his comments this week that if people knew how to cook better, they would save money in the face of rising prices. We're talking about the Queen's speech delivered this week by the Prince of Wales. And we're talking about the ongoing war in Ukraine after Boris Johnson visited Finland and Sweden to sign mutual defence agreements in the face of Russian aggression. And here's what Foreign Secretary Liz Truss had to say in Berlin on the way into the NATO summit.
We were very pleased to be joined by our friends Finland and Sweden. If they do apply to join NATO, the UK is strongly supportive of that. We're also working closely with the Ukrainians and the Poles and others to make sure that Ukraine has NATO standard defence. It's also important today that we focus on a global NATO, because as well as protecting Euro-Atlantic security, we also need to watch out for Indo-Pacific security too.
And as ever here on The Political Correction, we want to hear from you. So if you want to get involved in the conversation and have your email read out on the show today, then email us on gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet us at gbnews. This is The Political Correction. Well, we've just seen the clip there, and the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss has been in Germany, attending G7 and NATO foreign ministers' meetings, in which she urged international allies to go further and faster to support Ukrainian resistance. Her visit comes after Prime Minister Boris Johnson travelled to Finland and Sweden to sign mutual defence agreements. Finland has been subsequently warned by the Deputy Chairman of the Duma Defence Committee in Russia that they would be wiped out in seconds if they joined NATO. So, Paul, I'm going to start with you here. It's pretty aggressive words there, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'm slightly concerned, Deanna, that we are in Britain becoming almost like a global security company. I'm not sure that we've got the wherewithal to be able to make good on some of these commitments that we're making. I mean, Boris Johnson said recently that we will arm and support Ukraine to the extent where it will never be invaded again. That seems to me to be a colossal commitment. We've now said to the Swedes and the Finns that we're willing to enter into a security pact, which could potentially, as Boris Johnson confirmed, end up at some point with Britain putting troops on the ground in those places. And it seems to me that, you know, when you consider that over recent years, our own armed forces have been ravaged and are really not, you know, a shadow effectively of what they once were. I'm just very concerned that we are spreading ourselves so thinly now. Condemn the invasion of Ukraine by Putin. I think we should support the Ukrainians in repelling that invasion. But I don't think we should be acting as the world's policeman as we are, because I don't think we have that power to do so. I'm also slightly worried, actually, at some of the rhetoric. I mean, this seems to me to be a time not for more sabre rattling, but for a time for taking some of the heat out of the situation. And I don't see much of that. I don't see it from the UN. I don't see it from the British government. I don't see it from European leaders. I don't see it from NATO. And it seems to me that what's going to happen in response to this is that things are going to escalate. And I think that could pose a real problem for world peace.
But surely, given the sabre rattling that's already going on, it's completely fair that countries like Finland and Sweden would want to have that extra protection from NATO, isn't it?
Well, you can perfectly understand from their point of view why they would want to join NATO, but equally, you know, you I think have to look at things perhaps from the point of view of ordinary Russians who see NATO, for example, which was created in the late 40s directly as a counter to the threat of the Soviet Union, coming closer and closer to their borders. And this is something actually that even His Holiness the Pope raised recently about the tactics of NATO eastward expansion. It's been raised by Mikhail Gorbachev. It's been raised by even people like Henry Kissinger. So whether or not it's wise for NATO to court those countries is a different question. And I was struck by the response of the Australians and the Americans to the Solomon Islands, which recently signed a security pact with China. And the Australians and Americans have expressed very serious concerns about it. The Australians said that if China were to base its fleet there, it would be a red line. And I thought, well, hold on a second. I thought we were in favour of the sovereignty of nations and the right of nations to be able to enter into security pacts of their own choosing. So it seems to me, as usual, that Western foreign policy on this is somewhat hypocritical.
Arlene, what's been your stance? Because those words there from the Russians are pretty aggressive, aren't they, towards Finland?
Well, good morning, and I think that's the point. I mean, Paul talks about escalation. There's nobody escalating this more than the Russians. Obviously, Finland and Sweden have been partners of NATO since 1990. They've now, there wasn't any desire to join NATO until Russian aggression in the Ukraine and the fact that they invaded Ukraine in such an aggressive way. And I think they're well within their rights, their sovereign rights, to decide now we want to be full members of NATO and to be a part of that defensive pact, because they're worried and they're concerned about the aggression of Putin and his desire, his imperial desire to spread his wings. If the RPM doesn't step up in leadership, who will? Because we're not going to see any leadership from Biden or Macron or Scholz. And I think to disagree with Paul, I think our Prime Minister has shown real leadership in terms of the Ukrainian crisis, and he continues to show that leadership in Ukraine. And I think we should support him in doing that. What he's doing here is supporting Finland and Sweden. They are making their own decision in relation to NATO membership. He is saying, if you decide to do that, we will support you. And I think that that's very important, because our place in the world, our place as global Britain, as the term goes, of course I would prefer it was global UK for very obvious reasons, is very important. And I think the PM is right to make these noises and to say to Putin, who seems to only understand strength or weakness. So are we going to be in the side of weakness, or are we going to be in the side of strength? And I think the PM has made the right decision in relation to that.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Arlene. Well, we're going to get some more insights now from Major General Chip Chapman, who joins us today. Chip, thank you for joining us. What have you made of the kind of moves from Finland and Sweden towards NATO membership? Do you think it's the right approach?
Well, the paradox of the Russian position is all the things they don't want to occur because of their actions. And it's not really for Russia to caveat the sovereign choices of Finland and Sweden. So if you go back to 2019, the public opinion in favour of joining NATO in Sweden was around 20%. In Finland, it's 30%. Since February the 24th, when the invasion started, it's gone up to over 76% in Finland and below that in Sweden. So it is the actions of Russia which have led Finland down this place. It's also worth saying, of course, that Finlandization became a noun in the English language after Russia did exactly that to caveat the sovereignty of Finland with the Winter War of 1939-1940. Finlandization being this notion that your foreign policy is caveated by a stronger power. That is exactly why the countries which left the Soviet Union after the breakup post-90 wanted to join NATO. They feared a revanchist Russia, and that's exactly what has come to pass.
Do you think in Russia this will be seen as an escalation by the West?
Well, you can escalate in 7 ways: by targets, objectives, weapons, domains, which is cyber or space, by geography, if they extend the theatre of war into NATO, or by the rhetoric. So we're seeing the escalation by the rhetoric. I don't think the public in Russia know too much because of the propaganda machine of Putin. But the people you can't pull the wool over are the soldiers who are fighting and dying in Ukraine. That is a weakness for Putin, as is the potential for elites leaving him in the future. So that's 2 parts of what we call the Clausewitzian Trinity. And all 3 of those must be in sort of sync for you to campaign successfully. I don't think this campaign is looking like it's going in a successful way at the moment.
Mr. Chapman, we often hear the argument that Russia, Putin, has imperialist ambitions. But, I mean, isn't the truth that the power of Russia is nothing of the power of the old Soviet Union? And actually, the proof of that is the fact that, 3 months into the invasion of Ukraine, and they still haven't really got a foothold in this country, in that country. So the idea that Russia is on an exercise to increase its imperial power, I mean, that's just nonsense, isn't it?
There's a difference between being a superpower and a super problem, and they are not a superpower and they are a super problem. And you have to look at their enduring grand strategic objectives to really answer that question. Under Putin, there are two. One is to enhance their spheres of influence and regain lost territory, and the second one is to re-establish Russia as a great power. They are enduring things, and that's what grand strategy is. And therefore, the real problem we have is that leaders may change. Putin may go at some stage, although he could be there until 2036. Vital interests rarely change, and geography never changes. That is the problem with, of course, you're always going to have a border between Russia and Ukraine, assuming that Ukraine maintains itself as a sovereign country, which I think it will do, and of course a border with Finland.
So at the minute, there's a huge emphasis on trying to find diplomatic solutions. Do you think that's likely in this case, given Russia's general aggression towards Ukraine?
Well, all wars are fought for political objectives. So the object of war is a better peace, but it's from whose perspective and whose rules will apply. So from a Ukrainian perspective, of course, a better peace for them is that Russia, which originally, of course, invaded Crimea and the Donbass in 2014, is that those are returned to the sovereign part of Ukraine. From a Russian perspective now, I think their original objectives were maximalist. That is, they did want to take over the whole of Ukraine and used faulty intelligence and thought they could do the thunder run and overturn their political polity in Kyiv by D+3. They've now got more minimalist objectives, I think, which is to do with potentially annexing the Donbass in the future and having this land corridor to Crimea. So that's minimalist at the moment. Now, if things don't go well, that really puts us in a difficult position because you have sort of only scenarios, not certainties. And the real scenarios are something like Liz Truss saying that this will go on for 10 years or Blinken saying that we don't know how long this will last, which is probably more accurate. But the third one is actually a short war scenario where the Russian army actually collapses in the next few weeks. We think that they're at the position in the Donbass where they, in military terms, we call culminating. That is, their offensive power will be exhausted within the next 2 or 3 weeks. Now, that means they can either go on the defensive or there'll be a Ukrainian counterattack, which might push them out.
Well, Chip, thank you so much for joining us this morning to share your insights, which I think we'll all agree were genuinely fascinating. And Major General Chip Chapman there, former head of counter-terrorism at the Ministry of Defence. Now, Boris Johnson has pledged to grow and strengthen the economy through new measures introduced in the Queen's speech, which was read out this week by the Prince of Wales, with the Queen missing the state opening of Parliament for the first time in almost 60 years. In the speech, which contained 38 bills, Prince Charles said the government will level up opportunity in all parts of the country and support more people into work. So what do we make of it? Paul, I want to come to you first because it was quite a chunky one. I mean, 38 bills here announced in it, but I think you're more concerned about the bits that are missing, aren't you?
I would have liked to have seen an employment bill, which the government promised in the Queen's speech 2 years ago, Deanna, and nothing has materialised since. Now, we've seen recently with P&O being a good example, what it can mean for some workers in terms of not having the right workplace protections. We've got millions of people now in insecure employment in the gig economy working on 0 hours contracts. And the government promised, in fact, even in its 2019 manifesto, that it would give better protection for workers in that kind of situation, you know, people who are working irregular and shifts that are not guaranteed, people on, you know, for example, 0 hours contracts, and even talks about bringing in a single enforcement body to make sure that those protections were respected in the workplace. So, you know, I think that was a significant failing in the current climate not to have that employment bill in there. And when you look really at insecure work and the state of it in this country, it's actually a cost to the Treasury. I mean, the Treasury loses out, I think, something like about £10 billion a year in terms of a reduced tax take, in terms of higher social security payments as a result of people working in insecure employment. So, I think that was a significant lacuna. I think it brings into question, actually, the government's commitment in its manifesto to improve workers' rights in this country. I think that was something that's quite easy to say, but when it comes to delivering on it, it doesn't seem that they're very serious about it. And I would urge them, even at this stage, to make sure that that's brought about at some point.
Thanks, Paul. Arlene, what were your sort of key takeaways from the Queen's speech this week?
Well, obviously, the visuals of the Queen's speech were very strong, with Her Majesty not being able, because of mobility issues, to come to the Palace of Westminster. But for me, it showed the continuity of the Crown. We had Prince Charles there. Prince William was also there. So I think that shows that the Crown continues. And it was wonderful later on in the week to see Her Majesty at the Royal Horse Show and to see her smiling face. That was really very warming. But in terms of the content of the speech, you're right, there is a lot in there. Of course, we will always try and look for the bits that we want to see in there as well. Paul has done it with the Employment Rights Bill. I'm going to do it with the protocol, because I was disappointed to see that it wasn't specifically mentioned, although there is some language around protecting the institutions of the Belfast Agreement, which of course the protocol doesn't do. And I know we're going to talk about that later on. So I'll leave that there, but I do think it was a chunky enough speech, but the most natural thing is to look for the bits that we want to see in there as well.
Well, I think it'd be remiss of me not to talk about some of the key stuff that is in there very quickly to whiz through. There's going to be a new Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, which is all going to be about sort of planning, and I think it's kind of forcing owners of empty shops to put them into good use. There's going to be a transport bill to enshrine Great British Rail. The online safety bill is finally going to go through. A new public order bill to try and crack down on some of these very disruptive protests that we've been seeing happen around the country. Finally, a Brexit freedoms bill, which I think many of us will agree is long overdue. A new schools bill, an energy security bill, something we've spoken about quite a lot on this show, and an economic crime bill as well, just some of the key headlines. But 38 bills is going to be tricky for the government to get through in a year, isn't it, Arlene?
Yes, it is. And if they deal with the protocol, that will be 39, Anna. So,
well, let's round it up to 40. Let's get Paul's employment bill in there. And I think we've just about managed it. Well, Queen's speech, a huge story from this week. And obviously, as Arlene said, some incredible visuals there, seeing it, but also with the Queen missing, which I think many of us were quite saddened by. But coming up after the break, we're joined by MP Lee Anderson, following comments he made this week in the House of Commons about cooking and budgeting. And as ever, we want to hear from you today on the Political Correction. So if you want to get involved, email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. Don't go anywhere.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle, and a little bit of levity.
That's the question.
That's two questions, actually. That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to The Political Correction. And as always, loads of you have been getting in contact with us today. We've got David here who said, had Russia not been so very aggressive over the years, then different countries would not look to join NATO, so Russia has only themselves to blame for the expansion of NATO. Arlene, you've got some views for us as well.
Yeah, so Marianne says bullies like Putin have no right to dictate what other sovereign countries decide is in their best interest. Boris has shown that you stand up to bullies. You don't just stand on the sideline. We made that mistake with Crimea when Crimea was invaded. Strength in numbers has to be to everyone's advantage.
Paul?
Yeah, slightly different take from Susan, who says, I do agree that we, along with the rest of Europe, should be helping Ukraine to see off Russian aggression and bring back peace. But I'm also concerned about the amount of money that the government is spending on a war that really isn't ours at this time, when we have a very serious cost of living crisis. Of course, we need to make Russia realise that Ukraine has strength behind them, but I'm not sure that this kind of rhetoric coming from the PM and Liz Truss is not going to lead to Russia sending a strong message in a military capacity to the UK.
Interesting there. Well, I've got another David who says, I agree with Paul's assessment. Oh, we can't be having that. It says we can't afford to keep sending money and equipment, and our military is in no position to threaten Russia with any reprisals. Arlene, any more from you?
Yeah, so while I agree, this is Paul agreeing with Paul Embry to some extent, but then saying he must remember that Putin has threatened Finland and Sweden as well as the UK. Russian ministers are so childish, throwing around nuclear threats. They are like children in the school playground. They really need to grow up. The other point is that NATO is a defensive organisation.
Thanks, Arlene. And do keep your views coming in to us on GBViews at gbnews.uk or tweeting us at GBnews. Now, Conservative MP Lee Anderson caused controversy this week by saying that if people knew how to cook better, they would save money. The MP for Ashfield said that meals could be cooked for as little as 30 pence a day and suggested that cooking and budgeting courses would benefit people across the country. Some have backed the comments, but others have said the MP is out of touch. Well, let's find out from the man himself. We're joined by Lee Anderson, the MP for Ashfield. Lee, thank you for joining us this morning. Can you understand why people were quite concerned by your comments?
I can, Deanna, and good morning. When you see a newspaper like the Daily Mirror print outrageous front-page headlines like poor people can't cook, then of course the public are going to be outraged. I never said once that poor people can't cook. In fact, I would say that people who are poorer make some of the best cooks because they have to. They have to manage on a small budget. They have to be resourceful. They have to be creative. So that's absolute nonsense. I think the point I was trying to make was that, you know, some people who go to the food bank do like some skills like budgeting and cooking, and we've proved that. The nation's media was down at my food bank yesterday, checking out on some of the users there, and these were people on low incomes, and they were on cooking and budgeting courses. They were very, very positive, and the media went away not getting the story they wanted.
Mm-hmm. Well, Lee, you've been getting quite a backlash also on Twitter, which, as we know, is not quite real life. But one of the things that's been thrown at you are people asking if you're out of touch. So are you?
No, don't be silly, Deanna. I'm not out of touch. I've never lived more than 5 miles from where I was born. I'm embedded in this community. I will be out this afternoon. I was in my town centre yesterday, and the reaction of people in the town centre, people I didn't even know, were coming up, shaking my hand and saying, you know what, you're saying what we've all been thinking for a very long time. Good on you. Now, this project we're running is not about me demonising poor people. It's about helping some of the most vulnerable members in society. Now, look, I have one particular family that goes to the food bank once a week, but then goes to McDonald's twice a week. Now, I'm not saying a family shouldn't take its 2 or 3 children to McDonald's once in a while. Absolutely not. But what I am saying is that if they could save some of that money from time to time, they could go out and spend that money on the high streets at a local butcher's, a fruit and veg shop, come to our cooking courses and learn how to make wholesome, nutritious meals on a budget, at the same time teaching their children the life skills that they're going to need as well.
Mr. Anderson, I mean, whatever legitimate point you may have had about food education in this country, and I think it's fair to say actually that it's perhaps a generational thing. We don't have the level of food education in this country that we once did. But there's another factor here, isn't there? And it's whether or not government is doing enough for people in this cost of living crisis. I mean, we've just had a decade or more of austerity under your government. You've cut universal credit for some of the poorest families. You won't put a windfall tax on the energy companies to help alleviate some of the pressures that people have got in terms of their fuel bills. Real wages are falling. So it's not just about teaching people how to make beans on toast. It's about getting money into people's pockets through taking the right economic measures, isn't it?
So have you ever spoken to food bank users?
Yes.
And what they said to you?
Well, a myriad of things, as they always would.
OK, like what?
Well, do you want me to recount whole conversations I've had with food bank users? I mean, I'd ask you to answer the question that I put to you. The reality is that your government isn't doing enough. So simply lecturing people about how to boil an egg isn't going to cut it, is it? You need to do more economically to get money into people's pockets.
So I take it you've not actually spoken to any food bank users. That's normally the case when people like you have a go at me. I speak to lots of food bank users embedded in my community, and the government is providing billions and billions of pounds of support, local support, which people can access. If people are struggling, they can get in contact with me or the local authority for that extra support. There's £22 billion gone in to help some of the most vulnerable families in this country. I'm trying to do my bit for my community to make sure that they make the best use of the money they've got available. What are you doing?
Well, I've been an active trade unionist all of my life, and I fight for people in the workplace, and I'm very proud of that. What are you doing in terms of universal credit? Did you oppose the cut to universal credit? What are you doing in terms of a windfall tax on the energy companies? Are you supporting that? Are you supporting real measures that will alleviate the pressures on people, or are you just lecturing them about how to make
I'm supporting this government, making sure we've got an economy that's growing, which it is, that there's jobs. I think there's 1 million vacancies in this country. I challenge you, Paul. Is it Paul? I challenge you to come up to my constituency in Ashfield, come and visit the food bank I help at, come and talk to the service users there, come and talk to the most vulnerable members of my society. Get off your high horse, come up here and speak to some real people instead of your champagne socialists.
Well,
how's that grab you?
Let me say, when it comes to talking to real people, you don't have a monopoly on that. I speak to real people all the time. I'm rooted in the Labour movement. I come from a working class community. And in terms of food banks, I probably won't need to come to your constituency, Mr. Anderson, because there are so many food banks. There are so many food banks in this country now that I could just go down the road.
I think I need to act as referee here and just break this up. But Lee, one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about is the actual classes that you've been running, because you've been helping, haven't you? I've seen you with your chef's hat on your Twitter. How have they been going down in your local community?
What we're trying to do, and remember, this is not about me, totally about me. This is about a fantastic food bank we have in Ashfield that's set up this initiative where when food bank users come along, they register on a cooking course, a budgeting course, to learn those life skills which many people have missed out on in the past. And it's been a great success. You know, just yesterday when the press, on Friday, when the press came, we were talking to people who've never had these skills before. There's one lady didn't even know how to cook vegetables. It's you know, we're really trying our best locally to help people in what are difficult times. This is not just about keep throwing money like the Labour Party want. They want to tax the poor more and more. This is about helping people with real problems on the ground, you know, live their life the best way they can.
Thanks, Lee. Arlene?
So, Lee, good to see you. I mean, I fundamentally believe in self-help, and one of the reasons why I was a huge supporter of uniformed organisations like the Girl Guides is that they used to teach these sort of skills in terms of getting young women to understand the need to budget and how you cook, albeit my cooking wasn't great at Guide Camp. But anyway, I diverge. I go off on a tangent. What I wanted to really ask you was, is this a very good example of Twitter versus the real world? Because what you're trying to do is focus on how you can help families in your constituency to get the skills that they need, whereas Twitter is wanting to jump all over you because you're trying to say that you can cook a meal for 30p.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Arlene. I mean, Twitter's not the real world. There's a different name for Twitter. I changed the syllable slightly to give my description. But you know what? It's the left, it's the Labour Party, it's the unions. They like poor people because poor people are their meal ticket. They like to see people in misery because that gives them the very reason for their existence. But I tell you what, Some of the most vulnerable people in my society, the poorer people, have turned their back on the Labour Party and the unions, and they're looking to people like me in their communities to help them, because they know I live here, I care about the people in my community, and I will go hell for leather to help every single person in the constituency of Ashfield.
Well, Lee, thank you so much for joining us on the show this morning to talk about what's been quite a busy week for you, I imagine, with media. So thank you for making time for us here at GB News. Now, Boris Johnson has urged workers to get back to the office, saying that cutting down on remote working would boost productivity and revive town and city centres in the UK. The comments come as it was revealed that 91,000 jobs are to be axed from the civil service to free up cash in a bid to ease the cost of living crisis. Minister for Brexit Opportunities and Government Efficiency, Jacob Rees-Mogg, defended the proposals, saying people were taken into the civil service specifically to help deal with COVID, as well as the aftermath of Brexit. So, Arlene, I want to come to you first on this. Do you think that this is the right approach from government to kind of chop the civil service?
Well, I think there's the two issues here. First of all, in relation to dealing with the excessive numbers in the civil service, I understand the civil service did grow by 91,000 during Brexit and COVID. I think there does need to be a conversation. But before Paul comes in and tells me that the unions need to be involved, the unions do need to be involved. And I think the way in which this was announced was wrong. They should have been speaking to the unions about the fact that they needed to deal with these issues before a public announcement was made. I think the story appeared in the Daily Mail before the letter from Simon Case had gone out to the civil service. So I think that's wrong. And whilst if we do need to make cuts, and I think it's right that we look at efficiencies and we try to be more innovative, I do think the government needs to reflect that we are in a cost of living crisis, and therefore we need to, or the government needs to reflect that. But there are ways to do this, and I think it was handled badly because staff morale is very important, and I think unfortunately this will have had a negative impact on staff morale at a time when it's pretty low anyway because of everything that has happened with COVID.
Paul, your response?
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's bad politics because it looks like revenge. That's the truth of it, because, you know, Jacob Rees-Mogg and Boris Johnson have complained over the fact that workers are still working from home and not back at their desks. It seems to me that this is just a knee-jerk reaction, which is possibly a tactic to try to bring those workers and their unions to heel, to make them comply. I also have a fear if this is pushed through in terms of the thousands of jobs that could potentially go, what the impact would be in terms of the functioning of the civil service. I mean, at the moment, we have massive problems in the Passport Office. We have massive problems at DVLC, largely as a result of a lack of people working there to be able to process applications and so on. So, you know, what this will mean for people who are on hold, HMRC, for example, people often on hold for hours on end trying to get through. But Arlene's right, you know, you've got to, if they've got a genuine reason, then let's hear it. If there's a rationale behind it, then let's hear it and we can have a debate behind it, but around it. But simply releasing this to the media in a way that looks like revenge, I don't think is a good look at all, and it ought to be challenged.
I'm also a little bit curious about the sort of call to get people back into offices. We were sort of running out of time here, but my take on that is surely it needs to be down to individual businesses, doesn't it? I mean, if a business can run effectively with its staff working from home or some sort of hybrid model, and if then they're not spending the money on commuting costs, surely that's then more freed up money that they could spend in their towns and communities.
Well, I think it's one of those things. What matters is what works. I don't think you should necessarily be dogmatic about it. I mean, I have to say I like a working environment. I'm a bit of a convert when it comes to working from home. I think it does give people a better work-life balance. It saves people on commuting bills, for example. If it works for the organisation and the individual, I'm not sure it's the job of anyone else to intervene and say it shouldn't happen.
My gosh. Paul Embry there saying there shouldn't be state intervention. I'm shocked.
For once.
Exactly. Well, stay with us because coming up after the break, we're joined in the studio by Mira Naran, MBE, who's campaigning for safer roads in the UK after her son was tragically killed back in 2018. Don't go anywhere.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question.
That's two questions, actually. That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to The Political Correction. In May 2018, Mira Naron's 8-year-old son Dev was tragically killed in a collision on a smart motorway. Since the horrific incident, Mira has tirelessly campaigned for safer roads in Dev's memory. As we approach the 4th anniversary of Dev's death, Mira is pressing the government to pass Dev's law. And Mira joins us now in the studio. Mira, firstly, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Can you just explain to us kind of what happened and why you're running this campaign?
So in 2018, my oldest son, he has drug-resistant epilepsy and suffers from lots of seizures. And that particular week, he was really poorly, and we rushed him into hospital. And one of the days, on the 31st, the doctor said that he may not make it through the night.
Gosh.
So we called his younger brother Dev to come and see him, and Dev saw his big brother. He gave him a big kiss, jumped into bed with him, and told him all about his day like he always did. And he said goodbye, and he left to go home. And on the way home, the car that he was travelling in stopped for unknown reasons, and a lorry crashed into the back of the car, killing Dev instantly.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
And that night, I sat in hospital in the corridor, and on one side of the corridor, one of my sons was fighting for his life. And on the other side of the corridor, my younger son was dead.
Goodness. It must have been the toughest night of your life.
It breaks you. I lost everything that night as I sat on that floor in that corridor. Everything I knew, everything that existed, just in a moment, completely disappeared. And I had to make a decision of what I was going to do going forward. And I decided I was going to start campaigning for safer drivers on safer roads. And that's what I've been doing since.
So explain to us what specifically it is that you're campaigning for.
So my campaign initially started around raising awareness around smart motorways. Because he died on the M6 on a smart motorway, and I just didn't feel like enough people knew how to use them, what they were, and so on. And so in 2020, I proposed 19 policy changes to the government, of which 18 were agreed to. And just January this year, there's a pause in the rollout, and they've also committed £900 million to make them safer. So that's how far we've got with the motorway side of things. But for me, it's not just smart motorways; it's all roads. So I'm obviously really urging that we have safer roads overall across the UK. And my current campaign, Dev's Law, his 4th anniversary, I'm urging the government to mandate autonomous emergency braking, DEV's law, which is an in-vehicle technology in your car or your vehicle. It basically detects a threat of a collision in front of you, which could be a stationary car or a pedestrian, and it automatically slows down or brakes entirely, preventing that crash. And experts have said that it could prevent nearly 1,000 collisions, fatalities over the next decade. And I'm campaigning alongside the AA, Edmund King, president of the AA, and I'm really urging the government to mandate this law.
Mira, I understand that what you're asking for has been rolled out across much of Europe already.
Yes.
What has your response been from legislators in this country, from MPs? Have you had a good response, and what is holding it back at the moment, do you think?
I'm not quite sure what's holding it back, to be honest. I proposed this actually in November last year, and I've not really had much of a response. I have actually received that we're going to have a meeting next week with officials. However, I don't have the agenda, and I'm not sure what that's going to be and what it's going to look like. But unfortunately, it has been very, very quiet. And July the 6th, this legislation is going to be rolled out across the EU. It's also been mandated in Australia as well. This technology exists, and it prevents rear-end collisions by nearly 40% and collisions with pedestrians by nearly 30 to 40%. That's huge. If that was one of our loved ones, if we could give them 40% or 30 to 40% of his pedestrians, save their lives, then surely it's something that we should be putting in all vehicles.
And Mira, is this a technology that would be rolled out in new vehicles?
In new vehicles, cars, vans, lorries and so on.
Fantastic. So in terms of kind of engagement around smart motorways with government, it seems as though they listened well.
Yes, they welcomed my campaign, and since then I have both continued to challenge them, but also work alongside them. For me, it was about looking at solutions. It was about looking at what we can change and what we can do forward. There's a whole host of factors that were involved in Dev's death. Road deaths are complex. There are so many factors involved. The road was just one part of it. The other parts were the vehicle, technology in general, driver behaviour, education and so on. There's so many different elements to it. So roads was just basically the first step, and they accepted my proposals, of which 18 were agreed to. So I'm always optimistic, and I have to hold on to hope that I really do hope that they will mandate this law. At the end of the day, I'm just a mum. I'm just a mum asking the government to do the right thing.
And, you know, I see the best of the House of Commons in the work that I do. On telly, you usually see the worst, but you do see the best of it. And it's campaigns like this that really do, I think, grip us as politicians and get us really enthused to want to do something. Have you been engaging with things like all-party parliamentary groups and other groups of parliamentarians?
So I've been engaging with these Transport Select Committee, obviously ministers as well, MPs and so on. They have been very engaging, and I have seen a huge level of commitment from their side. However, this is not something that can be changed overnight. Of course, there's a lot of things to take into account. And obviously we've had an international global crisis over the last couple of years. So for me, it's about being realistic in that expectation. However, with autonomous emergency braking, Dev's law, it was actually discussed back in 2015.
Wow.
That far back. So for me, it's not something new. I'm not proposing something that doesn't exist. I'm not proposing a technology that, you know, hasn't worked across the globe, across countries, mandated in Australia as well, in the EU. This is something that we, as the UK, have been involved with the trials and the evidence base, which was involved with EU before Brexit. So it's not like we're completely detached from the situation. We're very well aware of the trials, the evidence base, the logistics behind it as well. So I'm really hoping that they will really push this last bit and hopefully agree. It's Dev's anniversary on the 31st of May. 4 years he's been gone. He would be 12 right now. And we should be organising our holidays, summer holiday, what we're going to do this year, what we're going to do for his birthday. And instead, I'm pouring all of my grief into safer roads and safer drivers, and so everyone else can reach home, everyone's children can reach home, everyone's loved ones can reach home. This pain is devastating. It hurts every single day to wake up and have to remind myself Dev's not here. My baby's not here. And I don't want any family or any parent to have to wake up and do that. So if it means I continue to campaign for the rest of my life, I will do that.
Well, Mira, I think we can all agree that the sort of tenacity with which you have campaigned on this after such a tragedy is genuinely inspiring. And it was recognised because you were awarded an MBE for your campaigning prowess. How did it feel when you received it? It must have been a bit bittersweet.
I honestly don't feel worthy enough for that. Dev wanted to be a brain surgeon when he was younger. He said he wanted to help children like his brother with drug-resistant epilepsy. And he just loved people. He loved helping people. He wanted to make a difference. And I just feel this is all him. This is the love and memories he's left behind. And it's an honour of him. It's his. And I'm just trying to make it happen.
Well, Mira, honestly, thank you so much for coming in and sharing your story and for your valiant campaigning. And I'd love to engage with you separately on this to see how I can help in my role as an MP too. Mira Naran there joining us, talking about the incredible campaign that she's running on road safety. Now, I'm going to quickly throw over to Arlene because, as ever, lots of you have been getting in contact with us, and Arlene has got some views to read out, haven't you, Arlene?
I have, but before I do, can I just pass on my sympathy in terms of Dev's death as well? And as a mother of two boys, can I just say how impactful Mira's interview was today?
We seem to have...
For sharing, and for sharing your views. Sorry, have I been knocked off? Maybe I'm back again now.
You're back, you're back.
I'm back. I was just saying how much Mira's interview was a real impact for everyone watching, and especially for those of us who have young boys. And thank you so much for coming in. As ever, more GB views coming in. I think that interview between Lee and Paul has generated a lot of attention. And Michael says, whilst it's not widely known, food banks first appeared in the UK under Tony Blair's Labour government. They've been in use from around 2003 throughout Labour's years in office and have not come into being because of the, in quotes, nasty Tory party. Trish says what we need is domestic science taught in schools again. That's where many of us learn to cook and, of course, from our parents as well. Alison says, in all fairness, and I think this is probably very true, I don't think you could refer to Paul Embry as a champagne socialist. In fact, he has made some good points. I usually like Lee Anderson, but found him overly aggressive today. Paul Embry remained measured and controlled. So I'm now going to go back to the measured and controlled Paul Embry.
Well, we'll go to the measured and controlled Paul Embry because you've also got some views for us there, Paul.
I have, yeah. David says, for Lee, addressing Lee Anderson, at first I agreed with you. Now I've seen how arrogant you are and I realise it's just lip service and a poor attempt to make the government look good. And Vince says, these are just life skills that used to be taught in schools in terms of food education. Of course, it's common sense. Get it back now.
Plenty more as well. We've got Cliff saying, I think Lee Anderson's right. People can't cook anymore. I was taught to cook in school, but it's not taught anymore. We rely far too much on fast food and takeaways. We should also teach money management in our schools. And Paul, I've got a good one for you here. It's Jean. Jean says, I know it's not relevant, but I am so jealous of Paul's fabulous hair colour. There we go. That's what we've never had before. So
it's all real as well. And Stephen says, we all know someone who's working from home but spend sometimes gardening, having their hair done, their nails instead of working. It's about time they were back at their desks.
Well, I find this interesting. I used to, but in a past life, work for a company where we didn't kind of have working hours. It was all targets-based. So as long as you got your work done, you hit your targets, they didn't mind whether you're in the office, whether you weren't, whether you took 4 hours off in the middle of the day to go for a walk or shopping or whatever. I always thought that was a really sensible approach, but I'd be very quickly curious. Arlene, what do you reckon?
Well, I think it's a mixture. I think sometimes you can be more productive at home because you've got quietness and you're focused and you're doing what you need to do. But if you're in a collaborative basis, and I was speaking to somebody from a private sector company last week, and he said productivity shot up once people came back into the office again. So I think largely it depends on what you're doing at a particular time, Deanna.
Definitely a change in the weather picture for us across the UK. Cloudy at times, scattered heavy, possibly thundery showers and sunny spells. Let's home in on the detail. So in the southwest, mostly dry tonight, plenty of warm spells. Cloudier in the east, the odd sharp shower as well. The southeast, cloudy, warm, muggy, a few showers with further heavy thundery ones arriving for the south as well. Let's look at South Wales. Well, that too will be cloudy with outbreaks of showery rain, turning heavy at times, also feeling rather muggy with some hill fog likely. And a similar story as well for the Midlands as we end the day. A cloudy picture with showers which could be heavy at times. Muggy here as well, murky conditions over the hills. And the northeast of England ending the day mostly dry but also rather cloudy. Bright or sunny spells and an isolated shower also possible towards the south of that region. Little changes in southern Scotland, mostly dry there, but rather cloudy too. The odd shower possible, along with some brighter spells if you're lucky, feeling very warm for most, and a rather cloudy but pleasantly warm evening across Northern Ireland. Brighter spells likely, mostly dry here, only an isolated shower likely in the area. So a muggy feeling tonight following for many across the UK, especially in the south. Further heavy, thundery showers for us all. And that's how the weather's looking overnight and into tomorrow morning.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.